Emirates Team New Zealand have just launched a new foil and it's instantly been likened to a fighter jet. I kind of think that's wrong. I'm going to tell you why. So Emirates Team New Zealand have just started making alterations to their One Design AC40, taking it out of class, making it a test boat effectively, what's being referred to as an LEQ 12, less or equal to 12 meters. It's a special type of test boat they're allowed to make in the protocol. This new foil that they've put on, they're testing against the One Design foil. And the notable difference, as you'll see here, is that it's got a slight amount of anhedral in it. And this has been likened, and it's kind of like a very tempting analogy to make, to a military jet, where these types of wings with anhedral are used to create roll instability, putting the centre of mass of the aircraft above the lifting surfaces, helps gravity kind of turn you into that initial roll and turn the aircraft quicker, and that's obviously favourable if you want a manoeuvrable aircraft. And it's obviously tempting to make that comparison because jets are cool, America's Cup boats are cool, and it just all sounds good. But I really don't think that's what's going on here. First of all, when we look at our foiling monohulls, whether that be the test boats or the AC-75s, in terms of creating roll instability, the centre of mass for the boat is actually so far away from where the wing is that kind of like slight difference in geometry in the wing and where the lift is compared to the centre of mass is really a very small part of the kind of whole roll stability of the platform. And equally, they're not using roll in the wings to turn these boats. They're not banking the wings to initiate a turn. They're basically putting both foils down in the water and using them as centerboards or keels and a rudder at the back of the boat to turn, very much like a conventional dinghy. So this kind of use of this anhedral to create manoeuvrability, I don't really buy. I think it's much more about going back to the rule and the box they're permitted and how you get to those bottom corners of the box, having the maximum span but reducing your frontal area. We made a really nice video on this in the last America's Cup, comparing T foils to Y foils and some of the pros and cons of the two. But basically, for a T foil, you get your lifting surface as far down in that box as possible, which means the lifting surface is as far away from your centre of mass as it can be, which increases your lever, increases your righting moment, and gives you more power. The downside to it is that for any given foil shape, you have more vertical strut, and that basically increases your frontal area of the appendage. Going for a wire foil reduces that frontal area, but you still get to the full span in the bottom corners, and you also equal up the angles around the root of these wings, which maybe kind of eases up some of the hydrodynamics around them as well. Now, where you lose out the wire foil is obviously you're not putting the lifting surfaces quite so far away from the boat, but it's not as bad as it would first seem. So even though the root or the bulb, the central point is moving up towards the top of the box, the centre of lift is still slightly further away than this. We don't know the exact lift profile along these wings, but you're not going to lose that full distance in terms of leverage, only a part of it. When we're looking at anhedral, I don't think we should really be talking necessarily about manoeuvrability or roll stability. We're really talking about kind of maximising the span and minimising frontal area of the appendages. this seems to be a natural progression of where Emirates Team New Zealand were in the last Cup. Now, obviously, famously, they had the T-foils, and a lot of the time we spent before the actual Cup was spent watching them with their third and fourth foils. Yeah, that's right, third and fourth foils, which were dead T's, and they were slightly different on either side. One had more of a blended bulb, and one had more of a kind of a torpedo bulb. But their foils for the Cup were subtly different and had a slight pre-bend to them, slight anhedral or slight curve, and they lost a little bit of their strut length as a result of that. And I thought at the time that was very much about creating pre-bend, so that when loaded up, the foils went to maximum or actually past maximum span, so gave them more span. And all the teams in the last Cup, I think, were working on the principle that they were span limited in the foils with the box. They were all putting winglets on the end, suggesting they were creating more lift towards the edge of the foils than they would have ideally wanted. Just a little break from the video to tell you that Alan, a long-term supporter of myself with my own sailing and the channel in the last Cup, are passing on to you a 15% discount. Mozzy 15, links in the description, top quality kits, what I use on all my dinghies to win multiple national championships, European championships, Endeavour Champion of Champion, all their stuff, top quality components. So yeah, feel free to use the link as a little thank you from Alan. And yeah, that's it. Quite interesting there that this is kind of like a natural step on from that. And it's also kind of what we see Luna Rossa doing on their LEQ12. They've got their starboard foil, which you can see there, which has a visibly kind of amount of anhedral, not as much as what we saw on Luna Rossa, Ineos, or American Magic in their cup foils from last Cup, but it's still got a pronounced amount of anhedral in. I think similar, and we'll just overlay it and have a look, quite similar to what Luna Rossa have got with this curved, what Emirates Team New Zealand have got with this new curved foil. So, reframing what this foil is about, it's not about fighter jet manoeuvrability. I think it's much more about, if we're making that aviation comparison, we're looking at gliders here, we're looking about minimising frontal area, increasing span, having super high aspect ratio foils, and reducing down the thickness of those sections, become a bit bendy, adding a bit of pre-bend, maybe even once they're under load, getting past the expanding out or bending out past what's allowed in the rule. For me, there are some really interesting things about these foils though, and yeah, one of the big conundrums about a curved foil like this is how the flaps work through that curve. So getting a curved foil flap to move and rotate without affecting the shape of the whole wing must be really difficult, and that is intriguing, and we're going to look more into that. I don't have the answers to that. That's something I just find yeah, really interesting, and as we get more photos we'll zoom in, have a little bit more look at the design and see how that might be working, whether it's a foil that's designed so that when it's loaded it will, you know, the pre-bend can be completely removed and it will be effectively a T-foil, and then the flap will work. It looks almost too much pre-bend for that to be the case. So how they're getting these flaps to work around kind of like a constant kind of compound curve is yeah, is quite interesting, and whether they're using more than one element, flexible joints between elements, hard to tell at this stage. But that, I think, is a really interesting bit about this foil, because I think it's got a lot more kind of like compound curve than the Luna Rossa test boat has. The second interesting thing is that they're not putting winglets on. We've now got, obviously, the AC40s, one design doesn't have winglets. There's not too much you can read into that. Maybe it's just cheaper not to have to put winglets on. Ineos launched no winglets, and very small winglets on Luna Rossa, and then no winglets on this first kind of proper test foil for Emirates Team New Zealand. And what that might be hinting at is they're not quite so span limited as they were in the last Cup. So what you'll see on jets, which are limited by their wingspan so they can fit into the bays at airports, they often have winglets because they're creating, they have to reduce the span, and they're creating more lift than they would ideally want for maximum efficiency towards the end of the wing. And to stop that lift spilling over, they have the winglets to kind of, you know, put a bung in that efficiency. If you are kind of unlimited with span and you've got plenty of span, and they have increased the span, the kind of length of these foils in the new rule, then you're not having to create so much lift towards the end of the foil. You can have that kind of lift profile tapering off, like that elliptical loading, with very little lift being created actually at the tips, and then you don't have the rollover kind of vortices at the tips so much. That becomes less of an issue, and the requirement for those winglets goes away. So that's another interesting point, that they've kind of launched this new foil, and even though it's a test foil, it still doesn't have the winglets on. Yeah, really looking forward to seeing where Emirates Team New Zealand go for this. I'm going to be digging around just to see how these flaps are working, how they're loaded, what sort of shapes they take on when they're loaded, how much they're flying with a tip out the water. You know, could this be a shape which is designed to have a little bit of compliance to you know, add effectively suspension going through waves and chop? They're all the questions that I'm really interested on, and areas that I'll be focusing my attention on in the coming months. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, then subscribe, stick around, and yeah, catch you again soon.